Hello and welcome to Bedtime Life Stories. Settle into a comfortable position, let your breath slow, and allow your shoulders to soften. Tonight's tale is a gentle, real-life tinged mystery, soothing enough to drift off to, yet intriguing enough to hold the mind with soft curiosity. It's crafted for teens and adults alike. When you're ready, close your eyes and let the story carry you toward rest. Title: The Secret Attic That Kept Our Names. Chapter 1: The House That Exhaled. In late summer, when the air over the city turned the color of warm honey and the streets hummed with bicycles and slow buses, I moved into a narrow old house with a slanted roof and windows that blinked at the sun as if waking from a long nap. The landlord, Mrs. Finch, a kind woman with a voice like softened wool, handed me 2 keys. One brass key for the front door, one pale iron key for storage. She didn't say where the storage was, and I didn't ask. Some questions prefer to arrive when you're not looking at them too directly. The house smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Stairs ran up the middle, their railings smoothed by other hands before mine. On the first night, I unpacked a box of books, a kettle, a lamp with a linen shade that made the room glow like the inside of a seashell. I opened a window, and the whole house seemed to exhale, as if relieved to be remembered. It took me until the 3rd day to notice the thin line in the hallway ceiling, a seam that suggested a hatch. It was barely there, like a hush. I felt taller than I was just then, as if a memory had asked me to stand up straighter. The pale iron key lay on the table where I had left it, and when I picked it up, it felt cool and old, like a coin found at low tide. I told myself I would make tea first, open the attic later. But the kettle hissed, and the steam rose, and the line in the ceiling stayed exactly itself. Patient, self-contained. I took a breath, carried the small wooden stool from the kitchen, and climbed. The key fit a lock I couldn't see. The hatch let go with a gentle sigh, like a book opening to a favorite page. A narrow ladder folded down, dust drifting like sleepy snow. I stood at the bottom rung and listened. The silence up there was not empty. It had that soft, listening quality old spaces keep when they've watched people grow, leave, and return. I climbed. Chapter 2: The Quiet Room Above the House. The attic was wider than the house should have allowed. Light fell in from a round window tucked in the gable, a quiet eye that made the dust glow like tiny planets. Sloped beams crossed overhead like the ribs of a wooden whale. A woven rug lay across the floor, patterned with faded blues and river-brown lines that hinted at maps and shorelines and roads that believed in patience. There were boxes, yes, and trunks with brass corners, and a chair whose cane seat had softened into a gentle sag that invited, not scolded. But what drew me was a small door tucked into the far wall, no taller than my waist. It was painted the color of evening sky, not quite blue, not quite gray, and on its handle, a loop of leather worn smooth, was tied a strip of ribbon the color of old roses. The ribbon had been knotted twice. I didn't think anyone had been up here for a long time, and yet the ribbon looked recently thought of, as if someone had retied it before leaving. I sat in the chair and let the attic's quiet sit with me. The round window watched kindly. Somewhere far below, a bus sighed at a stop and moved on. The house shifted once, the way old houses do, settling into the day's slow breath. When I finally reached for the small door, my hand paused on the knot. There was no lock. The ribbon wasn't a barrier. It was a remembrance. I untied it carefully and eased the door open. Inside was a shallow space lined with shelves. On the lowest shelf sat a stack of composition notebooks, the kind with marbled covers and wide ruled lines. Each had a name written on the front in a neat hand. The top notebook read, "For whoever needs to remember gently." Chapter 3. The Notebooks That Wrote. Softly, I lifted the top notebook and felt a weight that was almost a temperature, not heavy, more present. I opened to the first page. The ink had faded a little, but held firm to the paper. The handwriting was not mine, and yet I could read it, as if it had been written in my own voice. It said, "If you have found this, welcome. This attic keeps names, and it keeps what names carry. The small rooms of memory people live inside when they think no one is looking. Take a breath. This is a place for remembering without rush. Write only what wants to be written. Leave what wants to stay. Tie a ribbon when you're done." I smiled without meaning to. The next page held a story of a late autumn afternoon when someone had climbed up from a dinner they weren't ready to leave, carrying the smell of nutmeg and rain on their clothes, to write down the name of a person who had taught them to unstick their thoughts by washing apples in cold water. A small drawing of an apple followed, with dew drawn in tiny dots. I turned more pages. A teenage scrawl confessed, "I started wearing my dad's old jacket because it looked like a map that had already decided to be kind to me." Someone else wrote, "In this house, my grandmother drowned out thunderstorms by telling the stories of every squeaky stair, and we slept because the stairs were louder than the thunder." Another hand had copied a recipe for lemon tea and annotated it with, "Breathe when the water starts to sing." I set the notebook down, heartbeat soft. The attic felt warmer, as if the stories themselves kept a gentle heat. I reached for another notebook. This one was labeled, "Names That Still Know the Way Home." Inside, lists of names, each followed by a word or two. Aiden, bread, and blue bicycle. Lila, freckle constellation. Mr. Cho, mailbox whistle. I didn't know these people, and yet part of me recognized the shape of care that held them here. I touched the page as one might nod to a neighbor. The round window brightened. The small door breathed. I had the feeling, sudden and steady, that the attic wasn't about secrets at all. It was about softer seeing. It was about making a place where the parts of life that didn't fit anywhere else could come upstairs and put their feet up. Chapter 4. The Ribbon Rule. The following week, I went about my life, work, grocery lists, the predictable tides of messages and meals, and every evening I felt the attic like a star behind clouds, present whether or not I could point to it. On Tuesday, after a day that required too many conclusions, I climbed the ladder again and sat on the woven rug. I brought a cup of tea and placed it on an upturned crate that looked as if it had retired from oranges. On the inside of the small door, barely visible, someone had penciled a sentence in tiny letters. "Tie a ribbon when you leave, and the attic will keep what you can't carry right now." I thought of the pale iron key, the not quite blue door, the notebooks of careful, ordinary astonishment. I thought of nights when sleep took the long way around the block. I pulled one of the lower shelves out, it slid like a quiet drawer, and found, tucked among the notebooks, a jar half full of ribbons. Not new ones, not showy, just lengths of fabric and twine and soft string that had already lived. They smelled faintly of cedar and wind. I took a ribbon, a thin linen strip frayed at one end, and tied it around the loop of the door handle. The knot felt like a small bow at a ceremony no one needed to attend. I didn't ask the attic to keep anything specific. It seemed to understand the shape of what I couldn't carry, and that was enough. When I left, the ladder creaked once in a tone that wasn't quite sound. It was closer to how it feels to be given a second cup of tea when you didn't realize the first had been enough. Chapter 5. The Letter That Arrived. Late and right on time. On a rainy Thursday, the mail brought an envelope forwarded across 2 old addresses and a summer sublet, wrinkled at the corners, forgiving. Inside was a letter from my cousin Danny, written months ago when the lilacs were still deciding whether to open. It said, "I found something with your name on it. I don't know if it's actually about you, but it felt like you." A key fell out of an old book at the library. The librarian said people sometimes hide things like that. It has your initials on the tag. I turned the envelope upside down, and a small brass tag clinked into my palm, stamped with my initials and the number 7. There was no key, just the tag. I held it and felt the strange certainties that come with rain and attic light and the sound of buses floating up through floorboards. I put on a sweater, slipped the tag into my pocket, and climbed. The attic welcomed me with that particular kindness spaces have when you return carrying more questions than words. I sat on the rug and laid the tag on my knee. "If there's a key to this," I said, not sure who I was talking to, "I suppose it will find me when it's ready." The small door opened with the familiarity of a friend who knows the hinge squeaks and chooses not to mind. On the shelf where the jar of ribbons sat, a new notebook rested. I hadn't seen it before. The cover was the deep brown of evening earth. On the front, in the same neat hand, 7 ways to be carried. Inside, pages waited. The first page held a single sentence. "Write your name, the one that isn't letters." I closed my eyes. The attic breathed. I thought of the ways people call me, by my given name, by nicknames that were once jokes, and then simply became the shape my friends made of me. I thought of the name no one spoke, the feeling that moved through me when I walked alone in early morning and the world had not yet decided which noise to make first. I wrote the nearest version of that. Listener, sometimes lantern. The next page appeared as if it had always been there. It read, 7 ways to be carried, even while you walk yourself. By the sound of someone making tea in another room. By the ribbon you tie when you leave a place that loves you enough to let you go. By the names of strangers who remind you that every hello is a small rescue. By the rain rehearsing against a window, gentle and exact. By the weight of a book that forgives you when you stop in the middle of a sentence. By the creak of a stair that has decided you are family. By the attic that keeps your name until you're ready to hold it. I laughed then. A quiet laugh that belonged in a library. "All right," I said. To the room, to the rain, to the ribbon like a comma in the doorway. I think I understand. Chapter 6. The Visitor Who Didn't Knock. Some places invite confidences. A week later, I found a note taped to my door downstairs, written in a narrow, careful script. "I used to live here when I was 12. I'm passing through the neighborhood. Could I look up at the attic window from the sidewalk? I don't need to come in. R." I opened the door and stepped outside. A woman stood at the gate, raincoat unbuttoned despite a low drizzle, hair tucked under a cap. Her eyes lifted immediately to the round attic window. She softened in a way I recognized. Relief is an older language than speech. "I wrote the note," she said. I moved out a long time ago. That window kept me gentle when I didn't know how. Would you like to come in? I heard myself ask. Only if you want to. The attic has a way of knowing what to keep. She smiled, and the corners of her mouth carried years in them. Kind ones. I thought I'd be fine just seeing it. But yes, if that's okay. We climbed the ladder together. At the top, she paused, one hand on the beam. This smell, she said, closing her eyes, like chalk and apples and the part of a library where the Atlas lives. I gestured to the small door. Would you like? She nodded. I think it's been waiting for me, and also I'm not sure it needs me to open it. Both can be true. She sat on the rug, touched the edge of a notebook, and then pulled her hand back, as if the warmth might be too much. When I lived here, there was a rule about not going up to the attic alone. I wasn't good at rules. I came up here once, after I had a day that I thought would echo forever. It didn't. The attic held it until it shrank down to something the size of a bead. I tied a ribbon and walked back down and ate toast and watched a show where nothing bad happens. I think that's when I decided I could make a life. We didn't need to talk after that. The attic did the translating. She found a notebook and wrote a single sentence. I didn't read it. The attic would keep it. When she left, she took a ribbon from the jar and tied it with hands that had steadied other people's hands. At the door, she looked at the window once more and said, "Thank you for letting it keep keeping." Then she stepped out into the drizzle and joined the ordinary world, like someone who had learned its secret. We're allowed to be carried. Chapter 7. The Night Without Sleep. There are nights when sleep looks at you from across the room, fond and so very far. On one such night, I climbed to the attic like a person going to a small harbor to watch a tide decide itself. I didn't turn on the lamp. The round window kept the moon in a shallow bowl and poured it gently toward the rug. The house had the rarest feeling, settled and awake at the same time. I lay on the floor, palms open, and listened to wooden beams tell the slow stories they tell when they expand and soften and settle back again. I could hear the city breathing through brick, the good kind of breathing, a rhythm that promised not to rush me. On the shelf, tucked behind the notebooks, I found something that hadn't been there earlier. A small tin with a hinged lid, the kind that once held mints. Inside lay a folded card printed with a simple phrase, "For when the mind is louder than the room." I turned the card over. On the back was a list of instructions, written as if the writer had been sitting exactly where I sat now, exactly as tired and exactly as hopeful. Pick a name that the night calls you, place it on your tongue like a small candy, let it dissolve. Count the ribbons you have tied in your life, even the invisible ones. Let the number be wrong, it doesn't mind. Listen for the stare you love most. Tell it good night. Wait for it to answer. I closed my eyes. The night called me keeper, just for now. I counted the ribbons. I told the 10th stare good night because that stare had a sense of humor and always squeaked as if remembering a joke. It answered, of course it did, with the gentlest creak, and my breath found a place to put itself down. I didn't fall asleep in the attic, not exactly, but the part of me that had been standing very straight all day sat down beside me and leaned on my shoulder. When I returned to my bed, the pillow felt like a conversation I didn't have to finish. Chapter 8. The Box of Names. Early spring is full of almosts, buds almost deciding, light almost warm. On a morning full of that kind of promise, I discovered a shoebox tucked behind the rafters, not hidden so much as unhurried. Inside, enveloped names on index cards, each sealed with a dot of wax. Some wax was pale and thin, like moonlight on milk. Some was dark and sturdy, like the crust on a country loaf. On the lid of the box, a note. Return them when they ask. Read only when invited. I didn't open any. I lifted the box, felt its small gravity. The attic, as if approving my patience, made the light shift in such a way that dust motes slowed enough to be counted. I set the box beside the small door and waited. By late afternoon, a card had slid halfway out of its envelope of its own accord. My initials were written on the corner in pencil. I peeled the wax as if it were an orange rind and found a name I hadn't heard since a schoolyard that no longer exists. A teacher's voice, a playground smell of wood chips and rain. The name landed in my lap like a bird that had flown a very long way only to rest. I spoke it aloud, once, and returned the card to its place. 2 days later, the box nudged a different envelope toward me. A neighbor's childhood nickname, one I had never known, but felt like a bell I'd been hearing through the wall for months. I told the attic, I will keep these safe until they find their owners. The attic seemed to answer by adjusting the air by a degree, the way a caring hand adjusts a blanket. That evening I took a walk. On the corner under the plane trees, I met the neighbor and asked, timid but certain, "Does anyone call you Rue anymore?" They blinked, surprised, then smiled in a way that returned them to themselves for a second. "My aunt," they said. "She's the last one. I haven't heard it in a while." I nodded. "I think the name misses you." We didn't have to explain how I knew. Some neighborhoods keep secrets by carrying them gently from person to person until they return home. Chapter 9. The day I almost moved. Life proposes changes with a straight face. Months later, a job offer arrived. Better pay, different city, brighter windows. I held the paper at the kitchen table and heard the attic listening from above. Part of me thrilled. Another part leaned against the banister and asked if stairs in other houses would know my weight. I went upstairs. The attic had gathered afternoon light in perfect handfuls. The round window wore a soft reflection of clouds. I opened the small door. On the lower shelf sat a key I had never seen, tied to a brass tag stamped with the number 7. It was the mate to the tag my cousin had sent months ago. The key was warm, as if it had been held recently by a hand determined to wish me well. Under the key, a card in that neat hand. Some doors follow you, some doors wait. This attic will not be jealous. It knows how to keep your name whether your boots are on its rug or not. I cried then, the simple kind of crying that doesn't ask for witnesses. The attic had never once tried to own me. It had only ever offered to keep safe what I couldn't. I sat on the rug and made a list in one of the notebooks, a list of what I would need to take and what could stay without me and still be mine. When I told Mrs. Finch about the offer, she nodded in a way that made me feel taller again. "Houses know," she said. "They send you along when it's time. They keep a chair by the window in case you visit." I didn't move. Not then. Not because I was afraid, but because the offer turned a light on inside me that showed me the shape of my present life, and I liked it. The key went into a small bowl by the door, where I kept coins and pebbles, and the courage to go and the courage to stay. Chapter 10. The night. The attic. said my name. Back there was a storm after that, one of those summer tempests that speak in percussion and flash. The attic came alive, rafters thrummed, rain applauded the roof, the round window blinked 1,000 tiny moons. I climbed anyway and sat on the rug, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder as if they were beads on a string. The small door was closed, ribbon-tied. The jar of ribbons was nearly full. I had tied many that season. Perhaps you know this life too. A season of tying and letting go and tying again. I placed my hand on the door and felt, through wood and paint and time, a warmth that could only be called attention. I whispered my name, not the one on my mail, not the one my cousin wrote, not even the one the night had called me. I whispered the name I used when I forgave myself for being simply human. It changed as I spoke it, as all true names do, gathering breath and lengthening into a sound that felt less like a word and more like a ribbon looped around a tree branch in a wind that promised rain to the gardens. The attic whispered it back. I did not hear it with my ears. I heard it the way you hear the end of a long day when someone turns off the last light, and the room, relieved, settles into itself. My shoulders dropped. My jaw unclenched. The storm walked its fierce dog around the block and then went home. The round window kept one star for us, just there, where it would be easy to find. I tied a ribbon. I went downstairs. I slept, like someone being carried. Not away, but toward. Epilogue. For whoever needs to remember gently. If this house ever becomes yours, or if another house lends you a staircase to a room that breathes and keeps, know this. There is no such thing as a secret attic. Not really. There are rooms that wait for us to learn how to ask, and rooms that answer before we ask at all. There are notebooks that write softly, and doors that prefer ribbons to locks. There are names that leave and return with better posture. If you're still awake, let the room you're in keep a little of your name tonight. Tie a ribbon in your mind to the handle of a small door painted the color of evening sky. Tell the 10th stair good night. Let the rain, even if it isn't raining, rehearse against an imaginary window just for you. Hear your name said back, not the one for mail or meetings, but the one that understands you, are sometimes lantern, sometimes traveler, sometimes both. Good night from Bedtime Life Stories. May your sleep be easy, and may every attic that needs you find you kindly, and may every ribbon you tie teach you the art of carrying and being carried. Softly, softly, softly.